The following program is a production of Pioneer Public Television. Major support for Compass is provided by the ongoing support of the Leo P. Flynn Estate of Millbank, South Dakota. Additional support is provided by the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, promoting Southwest Minnesota as a place rich with opportunity. Come for the jobs, stay for the lifestyle. More information at swmnpic.org.
Hello and welcome to Compass, a production of Pioneer Public Television. I'm Les Heen, your host for Compass, a weekly discussion of public policy and important issues facing our viewing area. This week we will talk about how media content can be a challenge in rural areas and what some news organizations are doing to meet those limitations and surpass them. And with us now to talk about rural coverage issues in small-town newspapers, we welcome once again Reed Anfinson, who is from the Swift County Monitor. Reed, thanks for being here. And we also have Dave Bordewick, who's with the South Dakota Newspaper Association, and you're based in Brookings, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Great. Glad to have you folks back on Compass. We had a wonderful conversation last time you hear about small-town newspapers. So huge changes in small-town newspapers all the time and lots of challenges. So I'll just start with what the challenges are. Dave, what are the challenges that are facing small-town newspapers right now?
Well, one of the challenges is resources, is coming up with finding staff to be able to do the job that you need to do to be a good community newspaper, informing your community, informing your readers, providing them with news and information that they need to stay connected. And it's a challenge to find staff to be able to do that, particularly in smaller communities. And some of that is also tied to having the resources to do so. In other words, revenue from advertising, and that's always a struggle.
Reed, in Minnesota?
Exactly the same as Dave's saying. It's the resources we have available to us, which are limited by our revenues. And when the farm economy goes south, as it has in the last several years, we are barometers on Main Street of economic health in rural Minnesota. And we feel it in our revenues and our ability then to cover issues and to assign staff to things. A lot of times assigning that staff means assigning myself or a freelancer or somebody else, but it definitely is a challenge for us to cover all the things we really need to cover with the limited finances we have.
What are some of the stories that you would then really like to do but necessarily don't get the time to do because of the challenges either in staff or in resources? I mean, there's got to be some things you say, oh, I really wish I could do those stories.
The stories I would really like to do is I'd like to cover our courts better. We don't get to do much with our courts, and it's important because within the justice system we know we have a lot of mental health cases and problems out in rural Minnesota right now that the people are coming back into our communities, and why and what is the impact on our communities and how are we handling those issues. We don't have a lot of time to cover those stories. They take more in depth. They take a lot more time. We'd like to do more on the daycare issue and why that's a problem and what we can do about it. We'd like to do more on economic development and the decline of rural population, and what should we be doing to try and boost rural population. What kinds of things do we need in our communities? And we don't have the resources or the time to really do those stories.
Dave, are you hearing that same sort of thing from
Yes.
the editors you work with?
Exactly, Les. I mean, it's having the time, having the staff to be able to work on sort of the big picture type stories that they would love to do, whether it deals with education or taxes or economic development or the growing drug issues within rural America as well. I mean, those stories are there, and I hear from editors across the state in South Dakota, oh, I wish I had the ability or the resources to do that, because those stories need to be told and in some instances they're not. They're just because the sources aren't there, resources aren't there.
And there are some ways, though I know that in South Dakota you've pooled resources in the sense with things like the way you cover the state capitol, right?
Exactly. We at South Dakota Newspaper Association each year hire a reporter to be at the Capitol, to be in the committee rooms and covering the day-to-day legislative activity, and then writing a package of stories that we distribute to all of our weekly newspapers across the state. We've done that for over 20 years now. It's a very successful program. It's in fact like a wire service for weekly newspapers from the legislature, and that's been a very effective thing. We also we distribute pre-election type stories covering the statewide issues. We cover some sports on a sort of a statewide basis, and so newspapers have found that, I think, to be a valuable resource to be able to have that type of content available to them.
And Reed, I know you've talked about wire services as well. I mean, obviously that's an important way that you can work with other newspapers or work with associations to bring some of that information in.
We work with a program called AP Newsfinder, which is for small newspapers. A lot of newspapers can't afford it, but it provides rich information about what's going on at the legislature during the session, and then we can take their information, interview our local legislators, and put that information into the story. And we also work with Minnesota Public Radio on some coverage. Those things really help us. We try to work together as well cooperatively. Here in Swift County, we share the county board stories. We share feature stories that each of the newspapers write. And that's one way that helps us get a little more depth to our coverage than we can do by ourselves.
Yeah, because on a lot of these things you will see, stories that obviously can play well in more than one community. You can share, because in terms of every week, you've got to crank out the paper. And of course, in small town papers, I know all it takes is a walk into one small town paper. You can see it's not a huge staff doing the work. Yeah. and it may be news one day and bookkeeping the next, right?
Absolutely. Today I was writing some stories on the election. At the same time, I was getting the payroll done for both newspapers because tomorrow's a holiday and they can't put their checks in the bank tomorrow. So I was I own the Elbow Lake newspaper as well as the Benson newspaper, and I was trying to get both staffs their paychecks on time.
Wearing many hats.
Wearing many hats, yes.
Which is, I'm sure you run into a lot of misunderstandings when you're dealing with members of the public on these things, because it's like, well, what day is this event happening, and do we have somebody? Because again, you don't have endless numbers of people to go out and cover stories.
We don't, and there's often more things happening within your community than you can handle. Our school board and our city council meet at the same time on the same night. How do you cover both those bodies? And meanwhile, you've got maybe 2 different sports going on that night, and trying to get to all those things. We've found out ways to do it. The school board records its meetings, and then I take that recording and write the story from the recording. I'd much rather be there, but I'm at the city council meeting covering that.
Yeah. So do you find that oftentimes people don't give rural newspapers enough credit for the fact that they have to work that hard to get to all those places, that you can't be in 2 places at once?
I think it's probably more a case that they don't necessarily understand or appreciate all what has to go in to get that done. I mean, they'll see Reed at the ball game taking the picture, or at the school board, or city council covering the meeting, but they also don't realize then he has to go to X and X and X, and I think there's, until you sort of get into a newspaper shop or understand what's going on, I don't think you have a full appreciation of all that work that goes into getting that product out each week.
Yeah. Is that what you find?
Well, that's for sure, because we know that in many of the big newspapers, their reporters have a 40-hour or 38-hour work week. We have maybe a 50 to 60-hour work week a lot of times. And what a lot of people don't see is when a local community newspaper leaves that city council meeting at, let's say, 8 o'clock at night, and the paper comes out the next morning. And they're not going home to watch TV. They're going home to write that story and maybe do some layout. They might get to bed at 11 o'clock that night and get up at 5 and start again.
Yeah. What about social media? Because, I mean, one of the challenges of technology, there's some wonderful things that can happen in terms of getting the information that you need.
Right.
But then it also creates another set of expectations about how media is supposed to be interacting with the audience.
Yes, I mean, because social media can be so instant, so in other words, hey, I saw something on Facebook within the community, read or editor, why aren't you covering this? Why didn't you know about it? So, I mean, it's that instantaneous of social media that makes it difficult for newspapers to, to stay abreast and keep pace with, I think, at times.
Because it becomes another thing to keep track of,
Exactly.
in the sense of feeding the beast.
Exactly.
You've got to be out there.
Except that social media has two major problems for newspapers, if you look at where it's coming from. There was a story about a drug bust in one of the small town communities near us, and a bunch of people started putting stuff on Facebook about and there were people coming out of the building after this drug bust, and they were saying what terrible people these were. Well, none of these people had been involved in any of that, and yet their pictures of them were on Facebook and being told what terrible people they were. The other real problem is that 0 to 3% of a newspaper's income comes from social media sources or from its internet advertising. In a digital-only world, there are 117 newspapers in the 7th Congressional District. You maybe have 1 or 2 that even exist in a digital-only world. Newspapers in Benson and Appleton and Kirkhoven and Elbow Lake, Morris, those newspapers disappear in a digital world because there's no revenue there to sustain them. None.
So then it also puts, I would think, you in an interesting position, though, because you've got to correct, in a sense, what the story is. Because if social media is getting it wrong, you got to get out there and get it right.
It creates that challenge, exactly. I mean, because that's the number one job as a newspaper. You've got to have correct information, factual information out there. So that certainly creates a challenge. But on the other hand, social media also presents opportunities for newspapers as well. We have several newspapers in South Dakota who are using, for instance, they have Facebook pages to help sort of promote things that are coming up or things that they're may see in the next week's issue, and it's a way to sort of connect with readers and subscribers during the course of the week until the newspaper comes out. And I think some newspapers, if they're smart about it, they can use social media in a way that helps build the brand and build their product overall.
That's very true. We use Facebook to build our brand. We use a website, the Monitor News website, to put some of our information out there as a teaser. But then we also have a subscribable version of the newspaper online, a PDF version of it. So you can get the whole newspaper down in Arizona rather than waiting for it for 2 weeks to get through the U.S. Postal System down there.
Yeah, well, of course, it's going to take some time out of everything else you're doing to try to figure out how do you continually change for this social media landscape and get all the pieces figured out.
Just another thing that's on the plate to figure out, okay, how am I going to get this done this week, So
what they've found out at most major newspapers is the amount of social media time the reporters have to spend takes a huge amount away from their ability to do original reporting. Yeah. Instead of doing the original story, they're doing the original story, then they're rebranding it, they're reshaping it, having to do it in a lot of different platforms, and it just takes time away.
Because among other things, with a major newspaper, you'd be looking at getting that story done years ago. It's put to bed, it's out of there. Maybe there's a late edition and there's a revision on it, but now it's continually evolving.
And one of the big things about so much of social media and the internet is the instantaneous news that you have to have right now. Well, 90% of what we do isn't time sensitive. The story I'm writing from the city council meeting last night might be on a tax that's going to be coming up. Well, people have a lot of time to figure out what they think about that. And so most of what we do is not necessary to be put up on the web instantly.
And probably also not something that people are going to engage in as much if it's 3 to 6 months down the line. If this is an initial proposal, right, the first draft of a report, it's important stuff, but it's not important for them today.
Our real job is to educate the public on issues in their community. And that education is a long-term process for the most part. We do have to have breaking news, and when something happens, if somebody cuts a gas line and the whole city of Benson doesn't have natural gas, which has happened in the past, we have the ability to have that up instantly on the internet.
Yeah. You mentioned major newspapers a moment ago, Reed, and I was thinking about the idea that with major newspapers, there's a lot of attention paid in the country to the tremendous challenges of that. And it seems that, by contrast, local newspapers, compared to large newspapers, are doing very, very well, yeah, because you're not seeing the tremendous contraction.
You're not. In fact, I like to say so goes the community, so goes the newspaper. And so if you have a community that is doing okay or doing well, if it has good economic activity has jobs and has some growth, there's going to be a good newspaper there as well. I mean, that's really what drives, the community newspaper industry within our part of the world, is how are the communities doing, how is the region doing, and if that's doing okay, that newspaper is going to be doing okay as well, too.
Our number one challenge isn't the internet. It's the declining rural population. Fewer and fewer people. Swift County had a population of almost 15,500 back around 1950. Today we're 10,000 or a little less. That's less than the population of Swift County in 1900. And that's a major challenge for us, and not just in rural western Minnesota, but throughout South Dakota as well.
Yeah, exactly right. And then we see the same thing in South Dakota. That's right.
So it's clearly, that's, again, a long-term trend. Pretty clear what the trend lines are. You can do the charts. So you kind of know what those concerns are. So how do you have a healthy community, and that plays into what you do. What are the other things that really worry you about the small-town newspaper business? What are the worries?
Well, the Postal Service is a big worry, and not only in South Dakota, but in Minnesota and throughout the upper Midwest. We rely strongly on the Postal Service to deliver our newspaper every week, every issue. And if the Postal Service, which is going through tremendous challenges and consolidation, and so we're seeing service and delivery issues within South Dakota, and so newspapers are not getting delivered in time to subscribers. Subscribers don't like that. Advertisers don't like that. That creates a huge challenge for our publishers and for our newspapers, is that decline in the service and delivery of through the Postal Service.
Particularly if you've got ads with a very short timeline.
Exactly.
County fair is coming up this weekend, big
sales,
sale at a car dealership, whatever.
auctions.
It's got to be there when it's got to be there.
It's got to be there when it's got to be there.
Absolutely. The U.S. Postal Service and its decline are a major challenge for us, for those of us in the newspaper industry. When Madison and Jefferson and the founders founded this democracy, they knew that an informed electorate was essential to its success. And they did two things to make sure that happened. They established the Postal Service to get newspapers out to people, and they established public advertising to help fund those newspapers. Now, both of those primary things are still absolutely essential in rural America, in our small towns. But yet, government is working constantly to pull public notices and public information that they pay for out of our newspapers, and the U.S. Postal Service is constantly raising its rates to us, and its service is getting worse. They are both still essential to the health of an informed community in rural America.
Well, I know, Dave, on the South Dakota Newspaper Association, I noticed on your website there was a post about the fact that there was a resolution or your own efforts there to make sure that public notices remain an important part and that there's an expectation for that. How did that come to be?
In fact, we just celebrated a month of public notices observance in South Dakota, and the governor declared October Public Notices Month in South Dakota. Trying to bring awareness to the general public and to public officials, to our elected officials, about the importance of public notices such as school board minutes, city council minutes, bid notices, election notices, and the importance of what that means to informing residents and the community about what government is doing, about the business of government. And there's a constant struggle, oftentimes by government, to do away with those requirements for publication. And doing so means for a less informed community.
And opting in many cases to say, let's just do it online, forget this. That seems to be the argument,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
And they'll say, we'll put it on our websites, and it won't cost the taxpayer anything. Well, that's wrong, first of all, because they often are adding staff to handle more and more of the stuff they're doing online. So they're paying often much higher union wages to do that work, and it disappears online. People don't go searching for public notices on public websites.
Yeah. We've only got about a minute left here, so just want to touch on a couple things, give you both a chance to say, what are the things that you wish more people of local newspapers knew about the work that you do and about the role of the newspapers? Because usually you're putting it in print, you're putting it on the website, and it's out there, but now you've got a broadcast platform. So what are the things you'd like to tell them?
Well, I just think, just the importance and significance of what that community newspaper means to the community that they're serving. I mean, if you were to, in a community with a good newspaper, suddenly to stop that publication, to cease that newspaper, the community is going to notice that immediately, right away, because that connection is suddenly lost. And so I think having that appreciation and that knowledge of what that newspaper means for connecting the community, I think that's probably one of the most important things.
I agree 100% with that, Dave. The community newspaper is essential to the connectivity of a community. We bring people together with common stories, and those common stories and those common needs, that common information, makes us get on the same page as far as what we need to do in our communities. And that's why it's important that the public appreciate the newspaper from that standpoint, that we bring communities together. We try not to be divisive. We bring up divisive issues, but we try to find common ground on those issues.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Dave Bordewick, South Dakota Newspaper Association, Reed Anfinson from the Swift County Monitor News. Thank you both for joining us on Compass.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for this week on the topic of small town media. Our Compass producer, Laura K. Prosser, will take it from here and end this week's episode with the next installment of the Compass Literature Corner. Thanks for watching.
As part of the new segment to the show called the Compass Literature Corner, we will be talking to local authors and writers who have had an impact on this region, or whom this region has had an impact on. Today we have a man who not only writes about the Vietnam War, but survived it. His latest book, No Place to Hide, focuses on the battle at Nguyen Ba Den, one that he brings to life with his firsthand experience and tells through the company of men. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say that today's guest is an old Millbank resident and historical author, Bill Sly. Bill, welcome.
Thank you, Laura Kay.
So, Bill, why don't you tell us a little bit about your book and what inspired you to write from the company's perspective?
A statement by our battalion commander, he said he wanted what he called the historical people at battles. That would include the newspaper people and the awards people. When this battle started, they put me on a helicopter along with extra ammunition, and I went there and saw what was going on, and then after that night, I was asked by the battalion commander to interview the various people and write awards for those that needed it or wanted it, or that I wanted to give them to. There were so many people killed or wounded, especially the officers, that there was nobody to really put people in except the three of us, the battalion commander, a man by the name of Lieutenant Ladensack, and I. So I made a decision to write these people's story so they have something that they can have whenever they need it or want it. Actually, this is one of the reasons why I wrote it. It's very difficult, especially to remain somewhat objective. I don't think I was entirely objective, but I did something that nobody else at that battle did, and that is, after it was over, after I talked to the officers, I went back to my office and wrote up the awards. And I remember that the awards were actually correct because it was exactly from what the people told me. Mm-hmm. So I was a person who had put that battle into English already. I was the person in the battalion most qualified to write their story.
As an awards person, you know, you live to write and you live to translate and you live for research, correct?
That's correct.
And that is a huge part of this book, is the research and the respect you put into this. Tell us a little bit about that.
All right. Started out with the 1st Infantry Division Museum in a suburb of Chicago. They have every single award written by the 1st Infantry Division in Vietnam. All I had to do is go through about 10,000 of them. But it would hit me so hard because I was learning new things. And the learning on this is you don't know anything, and all of a sudden something triggers and you remember everything, including how you felt at that moment. And this is one of the problems with PTSD. Then I went to people that did research on your ancestors and found out that the first 3 letters of your Social Security card is the name of the state that you started from. So I knew the name of the people I wanted and the state where they were born. And that started my research. The second part of it, I went to the Army records and I asked for what happened that day. And I was able, because I knew exactly what I wanted, I was able to do all the research I wanted in about 3 hours or 4 hours. One of the things that was pivotal to the book was the fact that we had a battalion radio log. This radio log, when somebody's talking on the radio, there's a person sitting behind them recording the time, the two people in the discussion, and what the actions were that resulted from it. This gave me what I call my timeline.
So with that timeline, the entire book is written in dates and times and events. You know, you're literally following the timeline as you're reading it.
Yes.
And that's what you intended when you were doing this research and how you wrote the book. So why did you include, along with this timeline, nicknames and maybe a little different way of identifying the people in this company?
There's a story that goes with this, as with almost everything. I hadn't planned on it to begin with, but my battalion commander, Newell Vincent, he said, I want you to use nicknames and first names whenever possible. If you use rank and last name, like Sergeant Hardrock or Lieutenant Daring, people are going to envision a 2 or 3D person, that somebody they've seen on television or a comic. If you call him Popcorn or Spike, people think, well, that's like a friend of mine. And when Spike gets his helmet blown off and gets caught in the book in some vines, that's somebody you know. And I started working with it, and I really think it did a tremendous amount to the way a person reading it responds.
Speaking of that response, what kind of overall impact have you had from this book?
A couple of the people that read my dedication and had been in the book, a guy by name, we call him Wooly, and a guy by a man we call Hale. They were friends from Vietnam and from this battle. They got together and decided that as long as I had the names and the hometowns of each person that died, they would then go and find the relatives of these people and offer them a free book from the Men of Alpha Company.
Hand deliver it.
Hand deliver it. And they did. They found all 11 families and delivered 11 sets of books.
So, if you want a copy for your family of No Place to Hide, they can find it on Amazon. And where else can we find your book?
Barnes & Noble is one place. Google is another place. If you look up No Place to Hide, Bill Sly, you will find a number of responses, almost 4 pages of it in Google, of people that have read the book and then offered a response of how they felt after reading it.
Wonderful. So check it out and offer your own response. That's it for us in the Literature Corner. Please tune in next week for more people, places, and issues facing our viewing area. I'm Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser, and may your compass always point you in the direction of a good book.
Major support for Compass is provided by the ongoing support of the Leo P. Flynn Estate of Millbank, South Dakota. Additional support is provided by the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, promoting Southwest Minnesota as a place rich with opportunity. Come for the jobs, stay for the lifestyle. More information at swmnpic.org.